Amit Matani.
Yes.
Welcome to Blind Ambition. So we're really excited to have you here. You're here at a time where the world is kind of going mad, and maybe you could give some sanity for us. And hey, Brick, maybe you could kind of give it a real introduction to Amit, what he does, what he's about, and we'll just dive into it and really kind of learn what's going on.
Fantastic. Yep. We're excited to have Amit Matani on the Blind Ambition to provide a candid look into some of the top tech companies. Amit is the CEO of AngelList Talent. AngelList Talent is a startup and remote hiring talent marketplace. Recently, it made it easier for international job seekers, including those outside of the US, look for remote work. And before AngelList, Amit founded the social news site Lookmark and the mobile gaming company Miraphonic. And he is an iOS mobile engineer by trade, which is a pretty impressive feat. Thanks for coming on the show, Amit.
Thanks, Jax. Thanks, Rick. Great to be here.
I mean, I think we could start there. Can you walk us through your career? What is it like to be a serial startup founder executive?
Sure. I think it's interesting because I don't think I saw or like planned it this way, I guess. Like, when I was in school, this was like 2006, 2008 when I graduated, 2008. And this is before startups was really a thing. I mean, like there was the dot-com boom that happened and then it really quieted down and it was kind of ramping back up while I was still in school. But I always wanted to write code. It was something that I was super, super excited about. It's something that I've been doing since I was like 13 years old, I guess. So I continued to do that, went to school at Berkeley to learn computer science and electrical engineering. And while I was there, one of my good buddies that I went to high school and middle school with, actually, he was my roommate, and he happened to have put PHP, which is a programming language, as one of his interests on his Facebook profile. And Facebook back then in the day, in like 2006, 2007, had like these crazy search filters where you can basically search anybody with anything, essentially. And somebody found him because they were looking for someone to do some contract work. So they were searching PHP as one of their interests. Anyway, he got a job through that. And then ultimately the person that got him some contract work was friends with the founder of hotornot.com, which is a Web 2.0 startup from way, way back when. It was really popular from somewhere in like 2004, 2005, and kind of on. And Drew got an internship through them, basically. And he recommended me to work there, and we started working there at Hotornot. The company was maybe like 4 or 5 people. 2 of the founders had gone to Berkeley. All of the employees had gone to Berkeley, and it was like the quintessential startup type of company. And I hadn't even thought of that as kind of a career option, and I just kind of dove in, and it was pretty cool. It was essentially startup school for me, and that was the thing that kind of kicked everything else off after that.
And so you just fell in love with it.
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy. It's so different now, but back then, so 2007 was when the Facebook platform came out. 2008, 2009 was when the iPhone App Store came out. And I built a Hotornot's apps for the iPhone. I built the apps for the Facebook platform. Like before anybody had done anything, we were one of Facebook's launch partners, actually. And there's like 21-year-old kid like building apps that are being seen by 1 million people at the time was crazy. And now everybody can do it. But back then it was like, this is so awesome.
Well, wasn't Hoternot like the precursor to what Zuckerberg was doing?
Right? So Hoternot did 2 things. One thing was it helped, and the thing that most people know it for was this like rating site. So you could rate people hot or not, basically 1 through 10. But the thing that Hoternot did that kind of spawned all of the dating sites from them was that you could we had a product called Meet Me, which was a dating site, and you could say yes or no. And on the other side, the person would say yes or no, and it would become a match. And if you were a match, then you could actually talk to each other. So it was a precursor to Tinder, Hinge, all these other things, all these swiping interfaces. Hotornot was kind of the precursor to that. And the company was making a few $1 million a year. It was like 5 or 6 people throughout the entire time. So it was for me, it was kind of like, oh, this is an awesome thing to do. We were even moving servers around in like our data centers and stuff. This is, again, this is before Amazon. This is before AWS and everything else. So it was kind of the introduction to all of this. And the other piece was the guys that I worked with there. they all went to start startups too. So Drew and I were interns in college working there, but there were 3 or 4 other guys that were not founders that were working there. Those guys ended up going to start a company called Crunchyroll, which is, exited for billions of dollars recently. And a couple other guys at the company, they went and started another company called Cross Install that just sold to Twitter. Another guy, Dave, started a company who just sold called Chartable and sold to Spotify. So, all those guys there were just like building startups. So it seemed like the thing to do. And we learned from all of them, which was really, really cool.
One thing that we hear often is, like engineers, they often have like side projects that they're working on.
Yeah.
What's the moment where you realize like, aha, this is its own business. This could be its own startup.
So, I mean, it was interesting. So my first company after Hot or Not was, we left Hot or Not. Hot or Not was bought by some other company. And then we left a few months after that. And Drew and I at the time were, we had just graduated from college and we knew we wanted to build a startup because, the people that we knew were building startups. And our goal at the time was like, this iPhone thing is really cool. No one seems to be that into it. It was weird. In 2009, when the first App Store came out, like there was just not much out there. In fact, I remember the impetus for some of this was like one of the top apps in the App Store was like this thing called iPet Pets or something like that. I don't remember the exact name. But like it was basically just this like thing where it had like a 2D image of like a Tamagotchi style pet, and it just moved around the screen, and it was like one of the top apps in the App Store. I was like, this is crazy. We could probably do better. And so we were like, look, let's build something for the iPhone. We don't know what it is. We know we want to start a company, but we don't know what it's going to be. Let's set a goal of making maybe $100 a day building apps. Right? And we printed out, like back then there was again nothing there, so we went to the Apple's website, printed out all of the documentation they had to build apps, and we built this game. And we were working maybe crazy hours. It was the two of us. We were living together but had like a basement area where we could write code and stuff. And it was like Pokemon meets Mafia Wars. We really were big fans of Pokemon. I love Pokemon. Mafia Wars was like taking all the rage back then and like, oh, can we blend these things together? And Drew's girlfriend at the time was an artist. And we're like, oh, let's have her, make the art. And so we built this game called Epic Pet Wars. Like we started coding in like January or February, built the game and got the approval from the App Store in like April. And, that $100 a day, like we reached in like a week or two, again, crazy time, but not much there, but it started gaining steam. It got to the top of like the game section in the App Store, which today would have been no way in hell, just because the competition was so easy back then. And then Apple called one day. We're like, we love your app. We'd love to feature you. And so they featured our app at like, one of their primary spots. And, it kind of took off from there, which was, so, it wasn't this like, oh, let's do this side thing or whatever. It's like, no, we want to start a company, but like, we don't know what it is, but let's give it a shot. And, at the time you're 22 years old, you have no real expenses. Fortunately, the Hot or Not had sold and we made, we didn't make a ton of money. We made enough money to like be okay for like, half a year or so. And it was like, worst things worse, we'll go get real jobs after that. That was basically it.
It's interesting because I think you're kind of underselling it a little bit. Like,
sure.
I believe the gaming company was acquired in less than 6 months. Like, could you walk us through that process? Like, what is it like to have that kind of conversation?
I mean, it was kind of a whirlwind, right? Like we launched in April. We started getting a lot of traction, and I think by like a month or so in, by May, when Apple featured us, we started getting emails from a bunch of people saying, we love your app. And one of those conversations was with this company, Ngmoco, that ultimately acquired us. And, at the time, Drew and I were just like, it wasn't like, oh, we're game creators or like we have any experience doing this stuff. Like, we're just like, oh, let's build something cool. Like, that was really, really it. And the guys at Ngmoco were, EA and other executives that had kind of come to the mobile gaming space and wanted to like, well, let's just revolutionize it. And it gave us an opportunity. And again, it was just Drew and I at the point, but it gave us an opportunity to work, like link up with someone bigger that had done some of this stuff before. And we at the time really wanted to build essentially what became Pokemon Go. And we're like, oh, the way to do this would actually be to link up with, a bigger company. Obviously, we didn't build Pokemon Go, but that was kind of part of the process of like, let's kind of see this through. And so it was interesting. We also happened to be contacted by a few other companies at that time. And so over the course of a few weeks, it became like, oh, we'll invest in you guys as like a studio relationship to like, the other company wanted to acquire us. And then we told Engimoco they wanted to acquire us. They're like, we want to acquire you. And it kind of went back and forth in that. And it was a wild experience because again, you're 22 years old, like, you haven't experienced this before. Fortunately, we had, the friends that had been in startups and we got some good advice. But it was a wild ride. And then after that, once they agree to acquire you, you actually have to wait another month to actually close. And that's a whole process because like all the lawyers have to do all this stuff. And, I don't know, it was like, what is this going to happen? Is this going to happen? And finally didn't. It was a cool process.
That part had to be tough, right? As a young guy without any experience, like dealing with lawyers and accountants, right? That had to be trippy.
I mean, this is the thing about startups, right? You just kind of do it. You don't have experience doing it. Like, I think you just kind of do it. Like we never built a game. We'd never built an app for the App Store. We'd never, done it, almost everything that we ultimately had to do, including, I was in QuickBooks myself, setting up our accounting software. Again, this is a different time before most of the infrastructure we have for modern iOS development existed. There was no even Facebook platform or SDK. I actually figured out a way to pop up a web view to then kind of redirect back to our app using their OAuth thing for their normal websites to actually work within our application. So we had to discover all of these things on our own, from the infrastructure, the hosting, to the accounting, to the dealing with lawyers and everything else. It was, it was fun, but it was definitely we were completely flying blind. And, you look back now with all the experience that I've had, and then wow, if I had known how hard some of that stuff would be, I don't know how easily it would have been to be let's just go try it.
You're right. You probably wouldn't have done it. You're like, what? I got to do all this work. Let me just get a regular job. Let me get a regular job, and that's it. But because you said, as you mentioned, it was kind of on the forefront. Did your parents at the time say, well, maybe you should get a job, or, see you work all these crazy hours and, no, they just.
I have the standard immigrant parents, thing of they want you to be successful in the least risky way possible. Let's put it that way. So, become a doctor, become a dentist or whatever, where especially at the time, for me, going into tech in 2004, again, now it seems like a gold rush, right? But back then, the only thing that had happened after 2001 was that entire crash that wiped up half of Silicon Valley. And so I think for my parents, it was well, first of all, even going into becoming an engineer, they were okay with it because they knew how much I liked to code. I'd been doing it since I was a kid, but they were still kind of concerned. And then definitely, I think because Hotternaut had done okay and I was making money through that, I was paying for my own school, my own housing, and everything else. Once I started working, they're yeah, he probably has it. But they were definitely yeah, maybe you should think about a job at some point. But they were fairly supportive. Once I started making money at the first company, they're he's fine.
Right, then they're okay, he knows what he's doing. Okay, right. Once that happened, then he's all right, maybe he's onto something. We'll just be quiet, let him go.
Yeah, give me a few years, and ultimately it worked out.
You mentioned kind of drinking from the hose in the early days.
Yeah.
I understand that there's probably no VC money. Was it just pure grit? What was keeping you going at that time?
I mean, it happened so fast that it's weird now. So at my second company, we kind of went through those harder days, right? Where the first, I mean, when you're 22, and we had again, the burn rate that I had was incredibly low. I don't spend any money, right? You're 22-year-old, you go out with friends, you spend time at home, you're maybe spending, I think I was probably spending $2,000 a month on rent and everything else, probably a little more. But we had enough money at that point to kind of last for the year, given that Hotternaut had exited. And again, we were in college too, and saving most of the paycheck that we were getting from Hotternaut as well. And so we had a little bit of kind of breathing room, and it was basically let's give it 6 months to a year and see what happens. But within the first 3 or so months, the the product started making money, right? So we were actually profitable at that point. And obviously we were paying ourselves, we had to pay ourselves a small salary, but we were then kind of making money. And so we never kind of went through that phase of like, you know, how are you going to make the next payroll or anything like that? Because it was just the two of us. That said, like, I do think, you know, we could have thought bigger. You know, we could have always like gone out and raised money because there was VC money, especially at the time, like people were starting to raise. And we could have taken kind of that big swing of like, you know, let's try to make this a huge company on our own, really kind of build it out to something massive. But at the time, we were just kind of excited to work with people that kind of done it before and wanted to get their understanding and kind of grow that way. And so that was one of the pieces why we decided to kind of sell. But, you know, it was the next company was a little bit different, I think.
I mean, there's always this pressure right now to kind of make the headlines and fundraise almost for the sake of fundraising, right?
Yeah.
What advice do you have to folks who are thinking about, you know, hey, I'm an engineer, I have a good idea, I've decided it could be its own business.
Yeah.
Do you rush to raise? Do you try to be gritty and work through it like you did?
Yeah, so I think of it in kind of a few different ways. So I think, first of all, if you have an idea, you should build it without raising. The further you get, the more you can kind of prove out that it's working, the better kind of valuation you're going to get, right? Like they'll take less of your money because you have something that's working and you can show real users and everything else. And that's not a perfect analogy. If you're really amazing at selling your vision, like just top tier at that, you could probably raise a ton of money without even doing that, right? Like you've seen kind of these big companies raise a bunch of money. But I think overall, right now, it's just so easy to start something. You can put up stuff on AWS, you can start coding right now. Like there's so many SaaS tools out there that there's not that fixed cost that you would have before to really get something off the ground. And so I would put that off as much as possible. But then the moment that you see it working, you know, raising money allows you to move faster in a lot of different ways, right? Like it allows you, first of all, to move faster by just paying people, obviously, right? Like that's a big piece, in hiring people and everything else, and paying for infrastructure and everything. But it also allows you to move faster because I think the raising of, I mean, being able to raise money does show kind of to a lot of people that like, okay, this company has been vetted by someone else, right? And we see this a lot of times on our platform at AngelList Talent. You know, it's really hard to understand if a company is legit. And by seeing that, oh, the investor of this company was also an investor at, like, say, Facebook or something else, that adds an air of legitimacy to the company. And so I think raising also helps for that, like to go out there and be able to say, hey, we're a legit company. These investors have looked into us and everything else. And that also, I think, does help. So I think early on, until you can get, you know, further as possible to kind of prove out the model, don't try to raise if you can. Unless you're really, really good at raising. And then after that, do it so you can move quickly. I think that's the other big piece, because, you know, I think especially now that it's so easy to create something, a lot of people end up having the similar ideas, and it's usually whoever can go faster at startups is going to be the one that wins. And money is a big component of being able to go faster.
Amit, Rick, what do you think about this? So when you're young, you're starting out, you don't kind of know any better. So it's like, hey, I'm ready with this. You know, you don't have kids, you don't have a mortgage. What happens? A lot of people I see on Blind, maybe they're working for Amazon, they're working for Apple, they're making $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 a year, they're comfortable. Is it, in a perverse way, is that harder then to say, hey, I'm going to now leave a safe, secure job, I have options, I have the status of working for X company, but I do have this burning desire, I have this idea. Do you find that it becomes harder then to do that because you just get complacent because you're doing okay?
I think everybody's different, but I think the general trend can probably be, like, I would probably agree with it a little bit. Just, and it's not even complacency, right? It's the demands on your time are now different, and you're, you know, like, so for example, I have a 2-year-old now, and obviously I work pretty hard and I have a wife and everything else, but, like, you know, I want to spend time with them, right? And, you know, she'll have to go to school at some point, and, like, there's a certain amount of money that we need to make now to kind of keep all of those things going, right? Whereas, you know, back then it was like, yeah, I can eat like a burrito every day, I'll be totally fine.
You're happy,
and I can
fine,
literally work all the time. Other than, like, I got to tell you, when we were working, like, Drew and I would like work later and later into the night to a point where like by the end of the week, we'd have flipped like our sleeping schedules.
Yeah.
And like, it's, you can't do that as like a proper adult. That said, I mean, the amount of understanding that I have now would allow me to move way, way faster than like a 22-year-old. I don't have to make the same mistakes. So, I do think there is an opportunity for people that are further in their careers to take a swing at a startup. I mean, I think it's the best thing you can do because I think you learn so much. But I do understand that like people's desires and their needs and everything else change. And honestly, like, sometimes it's hard to kind of give up that like really nice paycheck or that really nice, experience that you've had over a few years. I think, and the other piece I'll say is that, at these bigger companies, the infrastructure they have around you, like if you're a coder or anything else, like a lot of these things have just been built out. And at a startup, like you kind of have to do all of those things. You have to be HR, you have to be, your like tooling infrastructure and everything else. You kind of, and like the systems have gotten better, but that is another kind of rude awakening sometimes when you leave kind of these big, massive companies that have like all the infrastructure.
Plus, it's nice. When I see the offices of Google and other places,
Yeah.
they make it really kind. It's like,
Yeah,
this is
please.
very lovely. I don't have to
Yeah.
worry about breakfast, lunch, dinner.
Yeah.
This is really, I have the whole social scene, especially if you're young. So it
Totally.
makes it enticing to stay.
Absolutely. I mean, I think about this too. Like, my first companies were in 2008, and then another one in 2011. And back then, the amount of money that you could make working at a Facebook or Google is many multiples less than what you can make now. And I think it would have been a much different decision had it been then versus now. And, I think it's an interesting time to kind of have to compare those options. Because like at the end of the day, if you're going to start a company, the likelihood that you're going to succeed is quite low. And you have to have another reason to do it. And I think for me, I think there's two reasons to do it. One is like you have a burning idea that you need to see exist in the world. And like, you should do it. The other one is like being able to get a rate of learning for a broad set of things that you just wouldn't be able to necessarily get at, a company of a massive size where your role is a lot smaller.
When you speak about the comp, because it's so hard, from what I understand, it's so hard to find top talent, experienced talent. And I know one of the things you've been doing is trying to get remote, but then also, do you think that the cost of talent is just going to keep rising, but can it keep rising indefinitely?
Yeah. So I don't know. I mean, obviously it can't keep rising indefinitely, right? I don't know what the end rate is, right? What we have seen is over the last few years is this kind of acceleration of tech. I think, over the pandemic, every tech company was a lot of tech companies were vital to kind of getting us through. And I think it's like remote work and everything else has kind of shown a path towards, every company becoming a tech company essentially. And I think the demand for technologists is very much, when what we see is kind of at an all-time high, and demand for new startups is kind of at an all-time high. Demand for like just investors putting money into startups is kind of at an all-time high. So we're seeing kind of this huge increase in demand. And the supply is not quite there yet, right? And it's not just quite there yet in like, in the US, like we're seeing that companies are really excited about going international because they're not necessarily finding enough talent, in the US. And so they're looking for people in South America, they're looking for people in Europe, and we're really trying to help them, like help these startups that have just raised money to be able to find that right talent, be that in kind of, remotely in the middle of the US or, in the middle of Costa Rica. Like, I think it's a great time to be an engineer. Honestly, it's probably one of the best times because the skill set that you have right now is just so in demand. And honestly, I think it's one of the best times to be a founder too. Like, at the end of the day, these waves are when kind of great companies are built and big companies are built. We caught the wave for when the iPhone came out, when mobile started, but now the Web3 wave is really happening right now. It's kind of coming into their own, and we're seeing such cool, like interesting companies get started around this. And I think every other company we see sign up for AngelList Talent is a Web3 company. And I think it's just an exciting time to see recruiting around that.
But what are some of the cool things they're doing?
It kind of runs the gamut, right? Like it's, you have companies, obviously the obvious ones that come to mind, like OpenSea, that are helping company, people buy NFTs and stuff. they were on the platform for years, and I remember when they just raised their multi-billion-dollar round, I looked, had they made hires on the platform. In fact, one of their founding engineers were actually hired on AngelList Talent, which is really,
Cool.
really cool, right? Like this person was that found them through our platform, and hopefully got a good equity deal, and probably has like generational wealth now, which is really, really awesome. But some of the other interesting companies, I'm kind of blanking right now, but one of them. Some of them are like building gaming, and one of the reasons, like, it's kind of similar to what we did in the past of building kind of gaming for Web3. It's really, really interesting. One of them is kind of trying to build economies to help gaming companies kind of run. So gaming web apps on Web3, creating an infrastructure for the economies for them all to make sense. So if you spend some money here, how should the token be balanced and everything else? And it's just kind of a cool idea that like all sorts of different parts of kind of technology, economics, and everything else have to kind of go into building a company like this, which I think is pretty cool.
Yeah, it does seem that way, where it's the nexus of gaming, then NFTs, and then buying and selling things with cryptocurrency. So it has this whole kind of ecosystem that's so interesting.
Yeah, it's fascinating, this idea of like, if you could have your entire database public, could you create the incentives that everybody would build on top of it? Which is kind of a fascinating idea. I mean, you think about even like talent networks like ours, right? Like we all kind of build our own little gardens where you have LinkedIn doing their thing, you have AngelList Talent doing our thing. And you could imagine a world where everybody's profile is on a blockchain, and every person, every node is kind of adding stuff and removing stuff and creating matches on top of it. And I think it's interesting how it all plays out.
You know what? You just maybe think of something. So could there be, you look at a place like LinkedIn,
Yeah.
and if you could have every name on a blockchain, could that kind of be a disruptor entity to have something equivalent to LinkedIn?
Yeah, I mean, it totally would be, right? Like, so if you kind of owned your profile data and it was just part of a chain and anybody could build on top of it, I think it'd be game changing. That said, a lot of the things that we do at AngelList Talent are all about moderation, making sure that people are making great connections. It's something that we spend a lot of time on. And I think that's the hard part in Web3 that people are still trying to figure out, like, how do you moderate something that's essentially decentralized? And it'll be an interesting like challenge to figure out.
On your platform, do you see more companies that are abroad or outside of the US trying to hire worldwide, or is it vice versa? These US or Western countries that are trying to expand elsewhere or get the talent they need elsewhere?
So the majority of people on our platform are US-based companies hiring internationally or hiring remotely. And there's a few reasons. Ultimately, the startup ecosystem in the US is much more developed than the startup ecosystem anywhere else in the world. So, for example, San Francisco, like, let's talk even the second tier city for startups, like Austin or LA has like way more startups than many countries around the world, right? And so the other piece to this is that a lot more money goes into US startups than international startups. And that's not true overall. Like, the top US international startups also get, a lot of funding, but as a whole, there's more going into US startups. So we see a lot of demand from US startups to hire, in the US, but also kind of internationally. We see a little bit, obviously, from, Europe hiring Indian engineers, or, around the world, people kind of hiring across borders. But generally, if it's a US engineer, they're coming to a US company, or, I mean, that's basically, or if it's an international candidate, they're usually coming to a US company or their local companies.
Is there a big difference if you have somebody who is in the Ukraine or Brazil or Argentina compared to somebody from San Francisco, Silicon Valley, in terms of their knowledge? So if you're kind of that remote, are you sacrificing anything, or they're just as brilliant? They're just born in a different place.
I mean, I truly believe they're just as brilliant, just born in a different place. But I think ultimately the differences are the experiences, right? So in the US, like, there's a more likelihood of them working for other startups like yours. There's a likelihood that they understand the culture. There's a likelihood of a shared kind of set of values and everything else, right? Whereas when you kind of go across borders, like, because the ecosystems haven't been built up as much, you don't see as many candidates that have had the same experiences around startups, around kind of the working styles of US companies. That said, that's rapidly changing and has changed considerably over the last few years. Everybody has the internet now. Everybody can learn any skill now just by going online. And the tools to get spun up have gotten really, really distributed. And so honestly, our own personal, like AngelList Talents engineering team, which is about 30 people, 40% of our team is based in Eastern Europe. And they're just as good as our US engineers. A lot of them are a lot more senior actually than some of our US engineers. So our CTO is based in Eastern Europe. For us, we think for sure hiring internationally is the way to go, because I think you can get great talent that, isn't as picked over as like the ones in kind of San Francisco and New York.
The two things I wanted to ask you about. One is that this is sound corny and sappy, but by having that, doesn't that make the world a better place? So that if you do have, don't mock me, guy. I mean, I'm not, because it does sound sappy, but doesn't that help? So instead of having everybody in, San Fran and everyone thinks the same way, has the same mindset and what have you, so that if you do have people in Latin America, and Asia, and China, and Mexico, wherever, and now you're all kind of working together, it just makes, it kind of breaks down the walls between us all. I mean, do you notice that? Do you think, am I just being idealistic?
Yeah, I don't know if it makes the world better. I will say that I've learned a lot because of it. So I think it made my life better, right? Like getting to know people kind of from everywhere. And it's not just internationally, right? Like our engineering team, or just our entire company, isn't just in New York or SF. We have people in Florida. We have people in North Carolina. We have people in Washington, DC, and Portland, and all
That's
over
the same
the
thing
place.
too, because you hear knocks on Florida. Oh, crazy Florida guy, crazy. You know what I mean? And you have misconceptions, and they go, oh, well, no, this guy's brilliant and very sophisticated. Exactly. And like, oh, I didn't realize that. Or if they're in Arkansas or Mississippi, so it's not even in other countries, it's just even here too in the US.
Absolutely. And I think you get to like meet people and remove stereotypes because you are working with these people every day. I just got out of a meeting and every single person was either in a different country or a different state.
See, that got to be so cool. That has to be, because you're probably learning from each other, different customs, different social norms. And it's just, it sounds like a nice situation to have. Like, I'm here in a suburb of New Jersey, right? Yeah. And everyone's the same for the most part. Seriously. We can have different colors, different whatever, but like we're pretty much all the same. It's very weird. It's very, you want some difference, some different kind of takes.
I mean, I think it's going to be fascinating. Mark Andreessen had this quote where it's the first time in the history of the world that we've decoupled economic opportunity from physical location.
Yeah.
And I think it's a fascinating time to be in the space of helping people get jobs and helping find jobs, because I think so much is changing. And I think what you're mentioning is like just one facet of how the world will change because of this. But I think there's going to be many, many more things that we're not even seeing quite yet.
The other thing is, and Rick and I were talking about this a little before, which is scary. Like how is it going for the people, whether who are working at your organization or kind of related and doing business with who are in the Ukraine or in neighboring countries? How are they faring?
It's tough. I mean, it's tough it's incredibly tough for them. And I can't, so we had one person that was in the Ukraine. We have several people that have family in Ukraine or are in Russia. And honestly, and then we have a bunch of people in Bulgaria, Romania, and neighboring countries, and it's incredibly difficult for them right now. Our Ukrainian employee got to a place where she feels safe, which is great. That was the most important thing for us. But for everybody else, like I just imagine if there was a war in Mexico, like how distracting that would be, or Canada or something. It's incredibly distracting. And so for us, what we're trying to do is make sure that our teams know that we're there for them, and giving them the resources they need. And, being also upfront that like, look, these roadmaps that we had for this cycle, or this quarter, probably are going to be shot, and that's okay. Their health, their well-being, and everything else comes first. But it's difficult. And honestly, as a platform, one of our biggest locations is the Ukraine. A lot of people look for jobs internationally from the Ukraine. And so I don't know how that's ultimately going to affect the platform as well. And I don't know what's going to happen to the industry over there, but it's a really rough time.
As- and this is not fair for me to ask, but like for yourself, is it tough? Like, do you find yourself trying to reach out to people there who, you know, are on your platform to say, hey, how can I help? What can I do? Or is there a company to do? Because I don't know about you, and this is what I was talking about with Rick before. You kind of feel helpless. You see these things unfolding, and I'm not going to get a gun and go flying over there to do it. So like, what, you know, what can you do? So are you, as AngelList, trying to figure out, hey, how can we just, like you said, you let him know that you care, but are there other ways to make sure, you know, because they have to worry about their job too. Like they're going to start thinking, hey, am I going to still have a job? What's going to happen?
You know, and this is we've had discussions about this, but we haven't come up with anything. For us, priority number one, and obviously the situation has moved so quickly. Priority number one was make sure our people were safe and like giving them the space they needed. We're trying to think about like what's next and how we can support the communities out there. But honestly, it's hard because they're in a war, and like, what can you really do? And what can we do from here? And so I want to make sure that, you know, we can provide and give them access to jobs internationally if that is something that they want to do. But we don't have any set plans quite yet, but we've been definitely thinking about it.
Yeah, it must be rough for you and the team there, because for all of us, your hearts go out to these folks.
Oh yeah.
And then but it's so changing. You don't know what to do. What can be done at times.
Absolutely. Yeah, again, it's, you know, you have people that you see every day that somebody told me this, like the distance between some parts of the Ukraine and Bulgaria, it's like San Francisco to San Diego. It's very, very close. And, you know, these people you see every single day are like that close to danger. And it's not something that, you know, I can't honestly, I can't imagine, you know, what it's like. And so we're just trying to be there for them and give them the space they need. And that's the best I think we can do.
Yeah.
Do you have any advice for folks that are abroad that are trying to come to the US or kind of want out of their country? Like when it's so competitive, this like global talent marketplace for the first time, how do you really kind of make the move for yourself?
Yeah, I mean, the thing that I'm really excited about, so my parents came from India, you know, out back in the 70s here, right? And for them, that was kind of the pathway to a better kind of economic outcome, right? And I think what's cool now is that you don't have to do that. You don't have to leave your friends, you don't have to leave your families. You can, you know, get a great job and still be at home, right? Be with people and like make good money. You don't have to come to the US for it. And so I'm really, really excited about enabling that. And for the people that have these set of skills that want kind of the US jobs, there's a few things that we find are really effective for talent on our platform. Number one, I mean, there's two things that I think of. Companies are specifically looking for, number one, great English skills. Number two, have worked for a US company. So obviously the first one's under your control. Have great English. If you have great English, do everything you can to show that you have great English. So like a great, well-written resume is one big piece, good online presence, videos. Like we've seen a lot of people, we have it on a platform where people can make videos to show off or like to answer some questions. And I think that's a really good way of showing your English skills, because ultimately communication is incredibly important to these companies, especially the smaller ones that might not have like a local presence. The other one is having a US job already. Now, people like that because it de-risks, you know, it's like, oh, they've worked for a US company, they understand the process and everything else, but not everybody has that. So I have a few recommendations for that one. One is you can do contract work for a US company. That's a good way to start. And that can kind of give you the entry point. The other one is, especially if you've gone to like worked at really legit places in your local country or like gone to legit schools, like I think the best thing you can do is kind of explain your experiences more than you would say for a local thing. So for example, like if you worked at a company, you're like, this is the top 5 fintech company in South America, and in South America by funding or whatever. Because ultimately a recruiter in the US might not know what the best companies, the best schools and everything else are. So it's really on you to kind of not only explain what you did there, but why the company is awesome and legit, because I think that'll get you further ahead. So those are the big things that I think about. The other ones that we've seen work really well is just an experience in a high demand but less popular languages, programming languages. So for example, like Ruby is still incredibly in demand, or PHP is still incredibly in demand, but everybody's writing stuff in Node and everything else. So, if you had a lot of experience in Ruby and still want to work in Ruby, that's like, we see Ruby developers making a lot internationally because people are looking for great talent because they can't find that in the US. So I think it's just being able to finding kind of those mismatches of the market and being able to kind of fill them essentially is what you want to do.
How do you identify these kind of trends to kind of target, really hone in on your niche?
Yeah. Well, there's a few different ways. So one way is to use sites like ours that kind of allow you to search different skills and see how many jobs are available for those skills. And I think that's a great way of doing it. The other one is a lot of these job sites, not just job sites, but like developer sites like Stack Overflow post like, what the most popular coding languages are. And you can see the ones that are like, gaining ground, losing ground, and find that niche that you can be in. The other one is, the awesome thing right now is crypto is really, really awesome right now too, where a lot of times you can just get started, right? A lot of this stuff is open source and you can just start committing code and you don't even have to get anybody's permission. You can just be part of it. And that's a great way to really get started, start contributing code to open source. People see that you're doing a great job, and then, moving that forward into getting a paying job and stuff too. Got it.
And do you see folks bringing people to the US, or do they stay remote?
It's interesting. I think we're still kind of early in the process, so I don't know how it will play out over a period of time. But one of the nice things, especially for talent now, is you don't have to worry about getting a visa. You don't have to worry about any of the the hard parts of like immigrating, basically. And so it's awesome because you can find somebody in South America, and we partner with companies like Deal, Panther, that allow you essentially do one-click hiring across borders. And so you can find someone internationally, match with them on our platform, interview them, and you can hire them in one click without dealing with any of the compliance issues, the legal issues. And it's the same thing for both sides. Like the candidates themselves have a very clean interface that they can work with. And so, it removes all those barriers essentially to get going. And I think that's the most exciting thing, where you can kind of be at home or be in your home country and not have to leave. And so that's something that we're seeing a lot of right now.
I'm curious, we always make this distinction on Blind. There's a difference between work from home and remote work. Do you ever see kind of companies embracing this like digital nomad culture of people hopping different countries or regions even?
So we definitely do. I think there's this idea, I don't think our terminology has caught up to the times yet in how we describe companies. And there's a really great blog post that I saw that I don't remember the name, but they described kind of the 5 stages or the 5 types of remote. And on one side of it is on-site only, right? And basically you don't have any remote workers, and you might have work from home flexibility, like you can work a day or two at home, but you are an on-site team and people have to be there. On the other side is like remote, completely distributed. So the entire company is distributed. You can be where you want. You can move wherever you want. You can do whatever you want. Even in that side, there tends to be this kind of issue around time zones. Like a lot of companies are like, hey, we're only cool. You can move wherever you want, but you have to stay within these time zones because like that's where the collaboration hours kind of are. And then there's like this middle ground. And the middle ground, I think, goes from remote okay, which is basically like, yeah, we have a few, we're primarily on site, but we have a few remote workers, but like the mode of work is on site, to kind of remote first, essentially, where it's basically like your team is on site and remote, but you've done a lot of work to to make remote workers and on-site workers kind of in the same level. So think about like benefits and like things like, for example, like if you're in the office, you get free food. If you're remote, they give you like a, a stipend to get free food or something else. And they've kind of put in the process to kind of make all those things work. And I'm forgetting the fifth one, but they all kind of fall under that category of like on-site only, kind of fully distributed. And I think it's going to be interesting to see what happens as like these companies come back uh, to the office. And we're starting to see that now, of like how long does this kind of middle group, or how big does that middle group stay, or does everybody kind of go to one side where you have on-site and work from home flexibility and completely distributed, whereas kind of the hybrid approach might be difficult to maintain. But we'll see. I'm excited to see how that plays out.
You know,
You
I'm going
mentioned
to poke
about,
the bear a bit, but
Yeah.
which do you think is going to be kind of the future on
In
that?
my mind, I think the hybrid approach is going to get gutted. I don't
oh,
see,
really?
yeah, I don't see it working. So basically, because so two things. One thing is, if your entire leadership team is on site, you're an on-site company. You're not a hybrid company. All of that, that's where the nexus of decision making is happening, right? And it's really like, and the most kind of ambitious people are going to be wanting to be near their managers, be near leadership, because they want that kind of back and forth. The other piece is like, if you're on site, like, it's like, oh, we'll grab some lunch together, we'll grab some coffee, we'll go to a restaurant after work or whatever. Like, you have all these little moments where like the remote workers are just not part of it, right? And so that's what I think is going to drive people over. The other piece is like, as much as you want to try to kind of create a balanced environment, like I think it's really, really difficult to maintain kind of the same benefits, the same kind of work experience for remote workers as local workers, right? Like one example is, because we used to be a hybrid company, and that's some of the things that we learned after going remote first was, for example, like if you're all in a meeting room together and you have like 2 or 3 people on Zoom, when you turn off Zoom, the people in the meeting room still chat, and you like have an after like meeting chat, maybe some context is shared. All those remote workers weren't part of it, right? So I think there's going to be this problem where companies, like people are either going to self-select into being fully remote because they get all the benefits, they're first-class citizens for their remote companies, or they're going to be on site because they want to be next to people. And like I think it's going to be hard to be in between, in my mind. Like, I don't know, like it's going to be kind of weird. Like if you're an on-site company and like half your team is now on Zoom and half your team's inside, it's just going to be difficult to kind of maintain that on-site culture. So we'll see.
But when you mentioned about Deal, I know that they would pay people with cryptocurrency, Bitcoin.
Sure.
What do you think about that? Do you think that's a wise move to pay
I mean, I
part of
think
it?
it's an exciting time. Sorry to interrupt. Because the original like way that startups worked was they pay you a salary and they pay you an equity portion of the company, right? That equity is not, you can't really liquidate it. It's not liquid until the company raises enough money where you can have like a secondary transaction, or the company gets acquired, right? And so you're kind of sitting on a big portion of your compensation that you can't do anything with. I think it's interesting now, especially with some of these crypto companies that are especially giving people portions or tokens that they're actually building, because then those tokens, like once they go live, they can actually sell it on exchanges and get a little bit of liquidity early, which I think is just really changes the model at which some of these employees are going to be compensated. So I think I'm excited to see how that plays out, because I think it's a different type of funding model and a different type of compensation model for early stage employees that might change the way that we do things going forward. And we're trying to figure this out right now. We're trying to figure out how we can let companies actually say like, hey, we pay in crypto, or some of your equity will be in our token, or you can get a portion of your like pay in crypto as well. So we're trying to figure out all those pieces right now.
It's interesting because I could see it different types of people. So let's say you put yourself back when you're young, starting out. You're like, I don't need a whole lot of money. So what? Pay in crypto. I'll put it aside. Let's see what happens. Roll the dice.
Right.
Or then conversely, if you're older and you have money socked away, like, yeah, pay me some Bitcoin or crypto, whatever digital asset or token. Yeah. This is, if it works, great. If not, hey, I have enough already. So that's cool. So it's an interesting concept.
Yeah, I mean, I think it comes down to like risk tolerance, right? And it's
Yes.
kind of what we talked about earlier about this idea of if you have a family and everything else, it might be difficult to start a startup. I think we live in an exciting time right now, because depending on your risk tolerance and like the things in your life, like you can either kind of take the much riskier approach, or because so much funding has gone to startups, like they can give you a real salary, and like you can kind of play in between on how you want to do that. But I think the exciting stuff is that, I think now compared to back then, 8 years ago, 10 years ago, we have such a broader group of people that can take part in the startup ecosystem, not just people that are in the US, but also kind of international. And so I think you have an opportunity for a broader group of people to, take advantage of this kind of wealth creation engine that tends to be like early stage startups, which I think is pretty cool.
Got it. On your platform, what are, like, when you're paying folks abroad, are they paying in local currency, US dollars,
Yeah,
crypto?
so exactly. So we're the matchmaker, right? Like our job here is to get them together. And then we work with companies like Deal, who basically are a platform for the companies to pay. And I believe they handle it. You could pay in US dollars, or they can do the conversion or whatever. But, they button that all up for you, which is really, really nice. So you pay Deal a little bit of money to kind of per employee, but they'll handle all the hard work for you. And
That's
we
a
have
lot of
integrations
headaches.
where you can happen on our platform.
That's a lot of headaches for them, right? Imagine that you got to deal all the tax stuff, all the laws, all the regulations, all, because I wrote about them too. Oh my God. I'm just thinking, what a headache that is to do all that stuff. Make sure you have everything, all the I's dotted, all the T's crossed.
Yeah. Well, it's great that somebody else is doing it for you, right? Because, before, for example, with our company, we had subsidiaries in the European locations where we hired people, because that was the way that you could hire like employees. And so now we work with one of these companies that, like, they handle all that for us. We don't have to deal with it. And it's just a really nice experience, which is great.
So you get to do it with the fun stuff that you like doing, which is great.
Yeah,
so you
exactly.
can focus on that. And then you outsource that. You guys take care of it. I don't really want to know in each country what the laws are, what they are, what taxes are. How do you do this? Thank you. You can take care of it. I'll do the other stuff.
Absolutely.
I'll do doing the hiring and finding the right talent. I'll do the stuff that you like doing.
I mean, and this is how we think of ourselves at AngelList Talent, right? Like, we're here to help startups find great teams. We're here, and we understand that they have a bunch of other things to do, right? Usually a lot of the users of our platform on the recruiter side tend to be like startup founders, hiring managers. And obviously we have big companies like Amazon and others on the platform. But like, these people usually have other jobs and they need to go do those jobs, right? And so we want to make tools that allow companies to basically come in, find great talents, and then go off and do the job that they're trying to do, like build awesome technology. And so that's how we see, what we're bringing to the world, essentially.
I mean, you've just been like such a wonderful wealth of advice. To cap things off, are there like any like last pearls of wisdom that you can share with like technologists and other professionals looking to kind of level up their career?
I think the main thing that I would say is, like, figure out what you want, I guess. It's such a amazing time right now to be a technologist. The wealth of opportunities, I think we just never seen before, right? Like, when I remember when I was younger, like, you'd either become an engineering manager, or you, like, later in your career, you couldn't have this like long career as like an IC and stuff. And that's kind of completely changed. And like, again, every single company now is a tech company. And so you don't have to just get a job at, big tech. You can start a Web3 thing. You can go work at a bank. Like, there's just so many different things that you can do. So I think it's a great time, but you got to figure out what you want first, because there's so many different types of opportunities. And so that's the main advice that I would give to people. Figure out like where you want to go, where you want your career to go, and then kind of take some shots. Like, ultimately, there's just so much opportunity that you can kind of go after anything right now, which is great. And if you're not a technologist already, learn to code. It's just so much easier these days, because I think there's a lot of opportunities for that.
Can I ask you guys both? This pertains to you too, Rick. And I mean, in the sense that, if I know with Blind and your company focused more on the tech side, but for this video for this podcast we put on, you're going to be a lot of people who watch it who aren't techies but would be interested in going tech. So for AngelList, if they would want to join, let's say they're a marketing person or they're a salesperson, they're welcome too, right? So you don't have to just be a kind of engineer. You could say, hey, I'm a lawyer, I'm an accountant, but you know what? I want to go and join a fast growing startup. And you could do that too, right?
Yeah, so AngelList
Okay.
Talent is the hiring platform for startups from early stage up to category defining companies, and it includes every role. We include every role that is part of that journey. Obviously, for early stage startups, a lot of those people tend to be engineers, and we see that on our platform. Roughly 50% of our jobs are engineering jobs. But the rest are all the other jobs. So we have a
So that's a lot
heavy
then.
group of jobs of like on marketing, on operations, on product, on design. Startups need all sorts of people to help them grow. And so we see a lot of professionals from kind of all stripes that want to join startups come to our platform, and we really support them. So yeah, definitely.
That's great.
Awesome.
That's awesome. Well, I mean, thanks again. It was great speaking to you again. And I love the advice. I love what's going on. And I'm glad you shared that last point because, yeah, I think for a lot of people there, how do I get into this? How do I get, who's not a coder? How do I get into a startup? It sounds great. Sounds awesome. So this way it kind of gives them some, all right, I'm going to give it a shot.
Yeah.
I'm going to try it.
Yeah. I think it's a great time to be in startups. So I would definitely encourage anyone that, wants to give it a try, no matter what role you're in.
Awesome. Thanks, Amit, for your time.
Thank you so
Thanks
much.
both of you. Thanks, Jack.
Thanks.
Thanks, Rick.
Take care. Thanks. It was good seeing you again. Take care, man. Bye-bye.